All right, well, welcome. This is the ear infection webinar. So if you're tuning in to that, you're in the right place. Um, so a little bit about me. I am a pediatric chiropractor. I work out of two different offices, Rosemont and Burnsville. I got into pediatric chiropractic when my wife got pregnant with her first child, Everett, and I wanted to be able to provide for her probably like the best possible like birth outcome. And there's some things that we know about chiropractic and pregnancy that are pretty cool. On average, it decreases labor time by close to 25% for the first pregnancy, and for second and then consecutive pregnancies, it's upwards of 39+% decrease in labor time, which is awesome. And we had both of our boys at home, and I wanted to, help her as much as we could with that. And it turned out to be pretty good. And we've got two healthy boys. My oldest just turned 4 a couple days ago, and my youngest is 2. And we might actually be able to hear them in the other room. But it's pretty cool. So why ear infections though? I got quite a few ear infections as a child growing up. I was quizzing my mom about this a little bit ago, and I think it was somewhere along the lines of probably around a dozen ear infections between 3 months of age and 6 years old, and it was just antibiotic after antibiotic with no real positive outcome from there. And a lot of times people attribute this to being like a genetic thing, and if that were the case, then you'd expect my boys to have had some of that, and they have never been on an antibiotic and never had ear infection in their life yet, and one of them is almost to the age where I would have had over a dozen of them. So you got to start asking some questions like, okay, well, why is that? What sets the stage for that? And I'm gonna start talking about that because it has to do with even preconception, what's going on during pregnancy, and then the labor and delivery too. So I touched on just a little bit about me. I am fully certified through the International Chiropractic Pediatrics Association, which is the am I not broadcasting? Oh boy. Let's see here. Oh boy. All right. Okay. We are now broadcasting. So all right. So I guess we'll take it from the top here now. So my name is Dr. Eric Rice. I'm a chiropractor with Health Pro Chiropractic, and I've got a pediatric focused practice and take care of a lot of kids. And I got into that when my wife became pregnant with our first child, Everett, and I wanted to be able to provide for her the best possible birth outcome and give him the best health start right from the jump. And so I started taking the ICPA courses, which were very, very helpful in learning the different ways to adjust and assess and determine about how to make adjustments that will help that child be its best self right from the jump. And so I became fully certified in that. The ICPA is one of the oldest and largest pediatric and prenatal certifying or chiropractic certifying organizations, and they put out a lot of great data and information, and they usually try to post a lot of their stuff. And so anyways, we had both of our boys at home, natural childbirth, no drugs. Our first child was an 8-hour labor. The second one back in was 5. And my wife looked at it too, like, a lot of the things that happen in hospital are some of the reasons why we see a lot of ear infections and things like that going on, and some of the struggles that a lot of kids are dealing with. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. So anyway, that's what got me started with that. And we know that women that are under active chiropractic care during their pregnancy experience much less labor time. So on average, that first pregnancy is 24% decrease in labor time, and then the second and then consecutive labor, pregnancies and labor time are around 39% reduced. So who wouldn't want that? I mean, I'm looking to make it as easy as possible, because it's not, an enjoyable experience to go through. So you get a wonderful, thing at the end, your new baby, but you definitely go through some work. So, so I put this quote on here because I think it's wonderful for what we do in chiropractic with children. And as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. So if you can handle a lot of this stuff from the beginning, and ideally, if you can start working with that mom, before they even become pregnant, it's even better. But yeah, if you can, the earlier again that you fix whatever problem might be going on, the better the outcome of that. So, and it comes down to this too, because not a lot of people think, okay, maybe I should be, consulting a chiropractor for some of my prenatal care or, pediatric infant care. But what we do know is that those people that do, the results are very favorable and desirable. Less illnesses, they're hitting their neurodevelopmental milestones. It's pretty cool, So myself here, why we're doing this ear infection webinar has to do with what I experienced, and then now looking at like what my kids are either, I guess, not experiencing or experiencing. So I had about a dozen or so ear infections between 3 months and 6 years of age, and typical allopathic approach, antibiotics. And, I hear this a lot too, like, once we started antibiotics, immediately the kids started feeling better. And that's not necessarily because it's killing the bacteria. It's because there's an initial anti-inflammatory component to the antibiotic that you're taking. So, and we know that oftentimes the infection is not bacterial in nature, and so antibiotics would literally do nothing. So aside from the anti-inflammatory effect that they have initially. So anyway, it comes down to what you know, and that determines your behaviors and the actions that you take. And then from there, that gives you your result. So as we go through this, I'll be giving some stories too from some of the people that we've seen in the clinic as well. So this is just a bit about me and my background. Enough of that, there's my family again. So this is just kind of setting the stage for the background of what we're talking about here. So there was a study done, well, there's lots of different studies that are done, but one of the scariest, I think, is that the United States is doing pretty poor as far as like maternal mortality and then infant survival rate with that first year of life. So you start to look at this and you think, okay, well, we have all this money. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and we spend more money than anybody on healthcare. And the problem is we don't really spend it on the right stuff. A lot of it's in crisis mode, kind of reactive nature, that type of thing. So, so anyway, something to think about there. So here's another study done that looked at basically chiropractic adjustments and then ear infection outcomes, which is pretty neat. This is something that we see on a daily basis in our office. There was a young girl, 11 months of age, had an ear infection every month of her time on the planet. The only month that she did not have an ear infection is when she started working with us. And you start to see these things over and over and over again, and they're not just anecdotal anymore. When somebody has this issue, you do this, and then you see that outcome, that there's something to that. So one of the things that we see commonly with all of these kids that are suffering from ear infections is a problem with the upper cervical vertebra, occiput and C1, so way up top here. So what happens a lot during the birth process, whether it be a cesarean or vaginally, there's a large amount of pull that's applied to the infant's head, between 60 to 90 pounds. So that's equivalent to if I were to pick up an infant by their head with a 60 to 90 pound weight to their ankle. So that's going to cause some issues up in here. It's not going to kill the infant. That's why it's not really looked at immediately, because the infant is born and they're alive and they're like, yay, the baby's born and it's alive, but they don't bother to look at the potential damages that can be caused because of that. I mean, any person would think like, that would be an issue, because the first thing you do when you hand your infant to like someone to hold them is you're like, oh, support the head and neck. Meanwhile, the birth process was happening. They were just wrenching the crap out of that, you know, whether it be a forceps or vacuum extraction or whatever it may be. So, so you got to think about that. You got to look at that. And back in the 80s, there's a study that was done that looked at 1,000 newborns shortly after birth, and they found that 80% of them had this thing called KISS syndrome, which in chiropractic that's called subluxation, but this was a medical doctor. So the big long thing for that was kinesmatic imbalance with suboccipital sprain strain. So all that means is neck here, off. Something was out of alignment there that was causing problems neurologically with the muscles and the nerves that left at that level. So why is that important? That's important because there's a nerve that controls your tube that goes from the inner ear to the back of your throat. It's called the pharyngotympanic tube, and that nerve is called the vagus nerve, which is a very important nerve. It controls the autonomic nervous system as well, which is the nervous system that controls just about everything in your body. It controls the rate and rhythm of your heart, determines like the dilation and constriction of blood vessels, organ function, gland function, lots of different things. But anyway, that vagus nerve also controls the muscles that have to do with the the closing and opening of that tube that goes from the inner ear to the back of your throat. All right. So guess what? If that's damaged up in there, how well do you think that tube's going to function? Not very well. So medically, what happens if the antibiotics aren't cutting it? They drill a little hole in that eardrum, pop a tube in there. You got a tube now. However, they didn't address that underlying issue, that problem between the base of the skull and that first cervical vertebra. You think that might cause some other issues in other areas of the body if we're dealing with the nerve that controls the autonomic function, which is the function that controls basically everything in your body, So you got to think about that. Okay, yeah, they might have dealt with that ear infection, but what else are we looking at? So anyway, I'm just getting you to think here. Okay, if that's there, maybe we should look at that instead of just drilling a hole in that eardrum and popping a tube in there and calling it good for the day. So anyway, what do you guys think it's now? So that was back in the 80s. 1,000 live births had 80% evidence of that. So this was a study that was done by a bunch of osteopathic doctors. They studied 100 newborns between 6 and 72 hours. 99 out of 100 of them have evidence of that going on. And I don't think it's a coincidence or just strange that this is happening at an increased rate. It's happening at an increased rate because there's more and more interventions that are being done during the labor and delivery process. But not just there, also, during the pregnancy too. It's looked at least as far as like in the medical world is concerned. They talk about all the different things that can go wrong during the pregnancy. That puts the mom into a state of fight or flight when she should be living in a state of rest and digest, parasympathetic dominance. So that infant's nervous system models it after mom's. So if mom's in a continual state of like fight or flight, that baby's going to be that way when they come out. And that's not what you want for a baby. You want them to be in that parasympathetic rest, digest, growth, and development. So, all right. So that's kind of weird and scary. But this was, again, this study was done by a bunch of osteopathic doctors, DOs. This wasn't like a chiropractic study or anything like that. So for those of you that give more weight to studies that are done outside of chiropractic, this was one that wasn't. So anyway, it's funny though, because what they found is something that only chiropractors can address. So, all right. So the things that you want to look for in your child or pay attention to would be, well, after they're born, well, how was the labor? Did any of those things get used? Was it a difficult labor? Was it long? Were you pushing for a long time? Did they have to, use the vacuum extraction method? How was it? I was doing a talk once, and a woman was talking about her C-section that she had, and how they were pulling so hard she actually moved down on the table. So you can imagine, a pregnant woman. I didn't directly ask her weight, but she, was over 100 pounds. So they're pulling on the infant with over 100 pounds of pull because they're pulling mom down the table there. So anyway, and I don't think it was any coincidence that she was at one of my workshops because we were talking about some developmental challenges, and this is why the main breaker was was tripped. So, anyways, So how was the labor and delivery? How was the pregnancy? Was it a stressful pregnancy? Was there a lot of change going on during that time? Job changes, whatever. So, but things to look for after the baby is born. What's the latch like? Are they able to nurse on both sides evenly? Are you seeing only tendency to move one way? Is the head kind of tilted all the time, maybe to the right or to the left? And then a little later on, oftentimes you'll see on the back of the head a little flattening developing on one side or the other. That's an indicator of what's called torticollis, and that flattening is called plagiocephaly. And that is an indicator of a problem way up top here. All right, it creates a contraction in the scaling, the scalenes, and also the one of the muscles that goes from the mastoid down to the sternum, called the SCM, and you'll see some tightness going on in there often too. So if you see these things going on, it can be a pretty sure sign that something's off there. If you start to see that flattening in the skull there, that's an indication that the cranials aren't situated appropriately, and you want to deal with that as early as possible during that first year of life. So that'll be a good thing to look for, or some good things to look for. So how it works, this is one of the technologies that we utilize to look at this, aside from the exam indicators that we just talked about. This is a thermal scan that we do, and this is an initial, and then this is a post scan up top here. And we usually see these areas lighten up like that. So green, blue, red, and then if it's really bad, it will be black even. But any indicators like this are like, hey, something's wrong here. So we use some other stuff just aside from how we palpate and feel what's going on in there, but also some technology like this, which is very helpful for checking to see if there's a problem, and also to make sure that what we're doing is correcting it, aside from the symptomatic relief and the breaking of the cycle of the chronic ear infection. So that's pretty cool to be able to have this technology, and this takes seconds to do this thermal scan. We also do something called Atlas Fossa temp testing, which is just a quick temperature read. Oftentimes we'll do that on visit to visit to make sure that we're correcting anything that might be off in there at that time. So it's pretty neat. We got some good technology to make sure that what we're doing is actually working. So I alluded or discussed this a little bit earlier, and a lot of the birth injuries don't result in that infant death, but you can imagine what that 60 to 90 pounds of pull would do to that infant. And when we're talking about kind of that main breaker between that base of the skull and that first cervical vertebra there, it significantly impacts neurodevelopmental outcomes. And that's what we're really talking about here. It's great that infant made it through the birth process, but okay, let's talk about like what the rest of that life is going to look like. So so that subluxation, which is what that is a misalignment and fixation, and creates a state of parasympathetic dominance. And that's what this over here is talking about here. It puts them in a state of fight or flight, and why that's a big deal. And this is what Bruce Lipton, he's known as what's called the father of modern genetics, but he's a PhD geneticist, and he's discussing how you cannot be in growth and protection, which is your parasympathetic nervous system, which is what you should be in, and you cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. So what he's talking about, growth would be your parasympathetic nervous system, and protection would be your fight or flight. So autism is just an extreme example of being stuck in that protection or fight or flight mode. But that's what we see. When you see, someone who's on the gas pedal all the time, they'll have difficulty sleeping. Oftentimes they'll be poor poopers, a lot of reflux. Feeding is difficult, nursing, that whole thing. A lot of kind of chronic ill type stuff. Infection internalization is what that's called. So, all right. So that fixation, that what I was talking about there is called dyskinesia, and that's basically like most of it has to do with that birth process. Some can be like in utero constraint, which is one of the things that we deal with when we do what's called the Webster technique, which helps the pelvis and sacrum become more properly realigned to allow for the infant to move to a position that's more comfortable for them, because the pelvis and sacrum have ligaments that go to the uterus, and if there's misalignment in the pelvis or sacrum, it creates tension or torsion on those ligaments, and then the infant typically is not go to the most comfortable. Well, they go to their most comfortable position, but it's not the most ideal for labor and delivery. But anyway, so you see a crooked, kinked, jammed, or bent, stuck joint. And the other thing that I didn't mention, when you start to see children with this, or when you're checking out your own infants, you'll oftentimes see more gunk kind of building up in one eye, and that has to do with a subluxation of one of the cranial bones off to the side here. And what it's doing is it's affecting the way that the tear ducts drain. So when the tears aren't draining, they're just basically drying when they're in the eyeball there, and it creates more gunk over there. And it's especially a good indicator that there's a problem when it's happening much more prevalently on one eye. And oftentimes you'll see maybe that one eye doesn't open as much as the other. So just another indicator to look at. But more importantly, when you're seeing 99 out of 100 infants with evidence of this subluxation, it's just a wise idea to get checked. It's a quick appointment. You go through some things, figure out what's going on there, and it can set the stage for a good amount of success and really change the trajectory of the health outcomes there. So when you see that, it leads to that dysautonomia. So we talked about that autonomic nervous system, about how that controls pretty much everything. So all the stuff that happens without you thinking about it. So like the food you eat, your autonomic nervous system is determining, how the stomach's going to digest that, not just the digestion of it, but what distribution of those nutrients should be. Should we use them for fuel immediately? Should we store them for energy later? Should we use them for repair? Should we do a combination of all three? That's just one example of what the autonomic nervous system does. So anyway, it's the thing that governs your immune system. So also, not just the mechanical aspect of what's going on there with controlling the nerves that have the relationship with the muscles that either constrict or open the tube that goes from the inner ear to the back of the throat, but also it has a direct connection with your immune system. So when you do come in contact with pathogens and things like that, it's going to lower your ability to recognize and deal with that. So anyway, not a good deal all around to be messing with the autonomic nervous system. So, all right. So just a reminder. So this is one of the things that we're looking at. When we see problems in the upper neck, like there on the bottom there with those colors there, we know, hey, something's up here with that, that parasympathetic nervous system with that vagus nerve. Make simple adjustments. We've got a bunch of different techniques to adjust the infants. It's not like what you're thinking when you go to the chiropractor when you're an adult. You got a pediatric infant toggle pieces. It's usually, it's typically actually quite an enjoyable adjustment. And oftentimes the babies just sleep through it. So anyway, hopefully this made some sense to you. And I just wanted to explain how we deal with this stuff in our office. So if this webinar, resonated with you, and you know somebody who could help or need some help with this, send it off to them, tell them about us, and have them mention this webinar, and we'll give them a VIP appointment, which is a break in some of the costs associated with that. It's $50. You get the exam, the scans, and you get to determine or get to see what's really going on and how to deal with it. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll be coming at you with much more of this stuff in the future. Thanks. Now I gotta figure out how to stop this webinar.